Welcome to Barnaby's podcast, Eye of the Beholder. Barnaby's is one of the leading search engines for art, design, antiques and collectibles from over 3,000 auction houses worldwide. We aim to make the art and auction market more transparent and accessible to everyone, from beginners to collectors and professionals. In today's episode of Barnaby's podcast, Eye of the Beholder, we talk to Peter Mansell, wine expert and head of department for wine and spirits at the UK auction house Tate Ward. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you, Pontus. Very glad to be with you today.
So you are a leading expert in the field. How did you get into the wine industry?
Well, I started developing an interest in wine when I was at university, maybe like a lot of people. I was lucky enough to spend a year studying in Bilbao as part of the Erasmus program, and had started to drink more wine there, and was able to go up to Bordeaux and visit vineyards in Bordeaux. So developed an interest there. And after I graduated, I wasn't particularly sure what I wanted to do career-wise. And I ended up just working for a local retailer in the town where I grew up, and then took it from there. So I started taking professional qualifications, the Wine and Spirit Education Trust qualifications. And shortly after that, I moved up to London to work for the retailer Selfridges in Oxford Street in the centre of London. Was there for 5 years, working the shop floor and in buying. And then in 2000, I moved into the auction business by taking up a role with Christie's, and it's just developed in there within the auction business. I was at Christie's for 15 years in London and in Amsterdam, and have now been at Tate Ward since we started in 2019.
Nice. So it all started with a thirsty student.
Absolutely, yeah. Starting drinking 100% cartons of wine, but and then I've graduated onto first growth Bordeaux. So that's the way it goes.
But what should you consider when buying wine? Should you think differently if it's an investment or to drink?
Yeah, certainly. If you're looking to invest, then you really need to aim for sort of higher quality as possible of wine that you can afford. Look for quality of provenance is absolutely critical. Quality of this, provenance, including where it's been stored. It should still be in sort of immaculate condition, stored in a bonded warehouse. If you're buying in the UK, or if you're able, I know on the continent a lot more people store at home, but keeping the wines in its sort of original packaging. So really, I would say there are sort of two grades of sort of wines. If you're looking at it like that, there are the wines that you can, sort of the investment quality wines, that really you just need to be very, very careful where you buy them from and where they come from. If you're not, and again, if you buy them, ideally, if you buy them directly when they're released from the producer, that's also one of the best ways to go about it. But for an investment wine, for everyday drinking wines, I mean, then it's a little bit more straightforward. If you know what you like, which regions you're particularly interested in, and they can be very different from investment wines, for example. But I mean, if you find a regular reliable supplier who you can get good quality wines from, whether that be a retailer or an auction house. Then it's a slightly different way to approach your sort of purchases.
But I mean, would you say the main intention of collector of great wines, are they doing it as speculation, or would they enjoy the wine one day?
I think there's an element of both. I think traditionally people were buying for consumption. I mean, wine has, has been appreciating in value for obviously a long period of time. I mean, and back in the past, people were buying. You might buy a few cases of a particular wine with the intention of drinking one of them and selling the four other cases if you bought 5, and effectively you'd be drinking the wine for free because the wine would have appreciated in value. I think now it has become a bit different. I mean, I think with sort of investment funds have been set up, and people are buying purely purely for an investment, and so they won't necessarily touch the wines. So in that respect, it has. I mean, there are some collectors obviously who will be buying these top wines and drink with the intention of drinking them, and particularly in other markets, I think there's a lot more focus on drinking the wines and sharing the wines, particularly say in Asia and say in the United States, maybe a bit more than in Europe. But certainly people are tending more and more to buy particularly more exclusive, more expensive wines to buy them purely as an investment and with an aim to sell, sometimes almost immediately if they can, or to hold for 10, 15 years to sell. Particularly in this country, people will just store the wines maybe with a wine merchant, and they'll store them in a warehouse, and they'll never actually see them, and then eventually they'll sell them, maybe at a profit.
But you often talk about the old and the new world when it comes to wine. What do the price looks like at auction? Are there any new world wines on the collecting market at all, or is it just the old world that counts?
Oh, and certainly in America, for example, you get a lot of Californian wines that have a large following. So it's like wines like sort of Screaming Eagle or Harlan Estate. You can go to Australia and look at wines from Penfolds Grange, Hill of Grace from Henschke. They are. So there are some New World wines at the very, very top end that have investment quality. I would generally say though that they are stronger in their domestic markets. I think American wines do better in particularly auction would do better in the United States. You'll find wines, some of the top wines in Australia or even in countries like South Africa will do better in their local market than they would say on a worldwide auction base. So generally, as a whole, it's still very much the classic areas that are the most sought after. So I would say that would be Bordeaux, Burgundy, and Champagne. A little bit of some Spanish wines and some Italian wines, but generally, it's still very much the classic. If you look at it from at a global level, with sort of regional wine, top wines from countries like America or Australia doing particularly well in their local markets.
How has the wine market changed the last few years then, if you compare to previous decades? Is it that, or is it something else? I mean, the behavior of the collector.
I think the main thing that's happened in the last, I'd say 15 years has been the emergence of the Asian market, the Chinese market particularly. There's always traditionally a good buyer base. Christie's used to do auctions when I was there in Hong Kong and Singapore and Tokyo, but they were quite small and certainly was nothing to compare to what's happened in the last 15 years. So the Hong Kong market has opened up, particularly once the sales tax was taken off wine. So it's a lot easier to import wine into Hong Kong. And the consumers in sort of Hong Kong and mainland China have had a massive appetite for wine and a massive thirst for increasing their knowledge and really it's a real sort of genuine sort of curiosity about wines, which has made obviously the demand has gone up and the prices have gone up quite a lot. I think what has changed. Traditionally, most collectors will start off buying Bordeaux. In some respects, it's the easiest fine wine area to understand because you have the chateau, and there's quite a lot of the wine is made. The production levels are relatively high for a sort of a fine wine area. But I think what's been fascinating about the last this period since 2008 is the sort of development of the way that it went very quickly from Bordeaux to Burgundy, which and the booming price of Burgundy in the last 5-10 years has been absolutely outstanding, incredible, really. The production levels are very small. There's very small producers and small vineyards, but it's really it's quite astonishing to see what's happened in that side of the market. And I say there really is an incredible desire by collectors in I'd say particularly in Asia to really seek out the finest producers and they don't and they're an example of a group of collectors who will not only will buy the wines and they buy the wines to drink, and they enjoy drinking the wines, enjoy sharing the wines with their friends and fellow collectors as well. So that's been the most the biggest change that I've seen. I mean, you do see when over the years, when new markets do come into the fine wine trade. For example, in the 80s, it was a lot in the United States. You had far more interest in the US from new bars from there. In the 90s, a lot from other parts of Asia, countries like Japan or South Korea, places like that. And then when that does happen, you do sometimes see a sort of a big spike in prices. But this emergence of the sort of Chinese market has been quite there's almost been a lot bigger than that, and it's been a lot more rapid as well in terms of the price increases and the way it's gone from region to region. Traditionally, people would say it would start in Bordeaux and spend a long time in Bordeaux before maybe moving on into Burgundy, but this happened over a period of a very short period of a few years, which is quite rare, really.
But is there any? I mean, you mentioned Bordeaux, you mentioned Burgundy. But is there any particular wine that you would say is always worth investing in?
I would say at the moment the most interesting one is vintage champagne. I mean, even products like Dom Perignon, for example, or Cristal or Krug, from the top champagnes. They, even though, I mean, take a product like Dom Perignon, there's quite a lot of it is made. But a lot of it also gets consumed. So, and you do, and I think, it's quite easy. It's quite accessible to buy on release. And I say, because a lot gets consumed, particularly in sort of in restaurants and in bars, in clubs, etc. And it moves very quickly onto the following vintages, because it's made now almost pretty much in every vintage, not quite everyone, but it's made with the new vintages coming onto the market fairly regularly. So that's an area I think where, for the regular investor, particularly depending on how much you would have, say, to spend, I think that's worth looking into. I mean, good quality Bordeaux, again, is, if you're looking for something, it is a pretty solid, good bet, I'd say. But again, you have, buying in the good vintages. And I think with Bordeaux particularly, you have to be prepared to really wait quite some time. I mean, wine as investment is not, unless you're really, really lucky and you get in when you have these sudden spikes, like we said we had in the Chinese market, particularly back about sort of 10 years ago or so, 10, 15 years ago. You have to be prepared to wait for sort of 10, 15 years to really realize a good gain, I would say. It's a very much a sort of medium to long-term investment. But good Bordeaux from the quality chateau. I mean, if you can afford first growth Bordeaux, I mean, I think that will be that'd be like chateaux such as Lafite or Mouton Rothschild or Chateau Latour. Then they would always be worth buying, because they make the best wines, and there's always going to be good demand for them. But certainly you can also go at a level below that, say, for example, Chateau Lynch-Barge or Chateau Pontet-Canet or Chateau Montrose, as an example, that aren't literally as expensive as the first growth Bordeaux's, but they're still relatively easy to source, and I say are well-known brands that will certainly increase in value. Burgundy, the top Burgundies are very tricky, because there's such small amounts made that it's very difficult to get them. There's a lot of competition for the wines when they are released, and they are on allocation. So, for example, Domaine de la Romandie-Conti is probably the most famous Burgundy producer. I mean, most people would only be able to buy them on the secondary market, by which time they become quite expensive. I mean, a bottle of Romandie-Conti will now cost you at auction £15,000 or £20,000. So that they are, if you can afford that, then again, it's an interesting wine to buy, and it will potentially because of the limited amount.
But what about the increasing competition then? Is it hard to source valuable wines today? Or what are the greatest challenges for you as a wine expert today?
think there's a lot more competition in with auction houses and from other sort of wholesalers. So and everyone's trying to find and buy the best, or buy or offer at auction and sell the best possible wines and best possible collection. So it is increasingly harder to find from a sort of a trade perspective to find the good. Good quality stocks. I mean, and I say they are fought over quite competitively. I mean, on the flip side is if you happen to own a great collection, then you're quite it's quite a good time for yourself, because there's plenty of choice where you can sell your wines. There are plenty of avenues, and there are plenty of people who would be prepared to give you a very good deal. I mean, particularly selling at auction now, the terms you can get as a vendor of high quality wines are particularly good. And it's become more and more competitive, due to the sort of the increase in players in the market now.
So let's say that I'm a beginner and I want to collect wine.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for people wishing to start collecting?
I think if you're again, if you're buying purely from a perspective of as a consumer, so you want to drink the wines. I mean, I think it's best to know, if you know what wines that you like, and maybe, because there's a lot of wine produced all over the world now. So if you know what sort of styles of wine you buy and you like, and I would stick to buying them. I think it's always worth buying from a reliable source, and buying from either a well-known merchant, reputable merchants, or I mean, in this country, for example, the multiple retailers such as the supermarkets and other multiple merchants, they do have good quality wines. But if you're able to go a bit higher up in quality, then certainly going through an independent wine merchant would be worth doing, rather than say buying wines from sort of multiple site retailer. The buying at auction, I think as a beginner, I think you have to be. I think I find most of the buyers I have at auction are have a bit more experience as buying. I mean, I think as a complete beginner, buying at auction can be quite challenging. And if you're buying, depending on who you're buying from, there might be a bit more of an element of risk, and I think you need to understand that. But I think once you've got confidence, you know what kind of wines you like, and you know what wines you're looking for, then buying at auction is a very good option, simply because, I mean, you're able to find older wines that you won't find on the general market, and also you'll find them at a reasonable price as well.
And what would you say is the primary thing to think about when storing wine? And because that's obviously a very important part of it, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, really, if you're wanting to keep wines, and you're spending a serious amount of money on wine, then you've got to invest in the storage. Otherwise, so you don't want to damage the wine because of poor storage conditions. I mean, if you're ideally, if you're able to have a house that has a cellar in it that can be has a sort of humidity and some sort of temperature control on it, then that's absolutely ideal. I know it's difficult for some people these days because of the nature of housing. A lot of people live in apartments, and so that, I mean, like myself, I mean, I've got a wine fridge where I keep my wine, which has proper temperature control. I mean, that's really, really critical to have that, and to store, let the wines, basic things like being the wine should be lying down, and again, kept in a sort of stable temperature. There's no real. I mean, the worst thing for wine is when the temperature is really moving around quite a lot. That really does damage the wine. So you really want something where it's got a sort of fairly constant temperature. And I know it says, people say, I mean, it can be between, say, 12 and 16 degrees. So it's quite a wide kind of spread of temperature. But really, the worst thing is if it's really going up and down on there's significant variations between temperature. That's the biggest. If you are storing wine at home and it's done at sort of ambient temperature, I mean, it will, and the temperature goes up by a couple of degrees in the summer, and then generally goes down again, then it's not a massive problem. It's only when there are real spikes in temperature that really causes a big problem for wine. And I mean, and then obviously if you've got, again, if you're looking for wine as an investment, then I would say it should be ideally probably stored professionally in a proper temperature controlled warehouse. That's probably the best thing. Or if you're able to buy, have proper temperature control in humidity control in your own cellar, then that's certainly worth investing in as well.
But do all wine develop over time then, or are there some that doesn't actually are made to collect over time?
Well, I mean, wine's a living product. It's gonna as it gets older, it's gonna develop, and it's gonna whatever quality level it is, it's going to change and develop. I mean, obviously the top wines are made to last for a very long time. I mean, your top Bordeaux's happily will last for in some 50, 60 years or more. And actually probably need at least 10 or 15 years maturation before they're worth drinking. But what you have to remember is the vast majority, and when I say vast, I mean I'm talking about all the wine produced, well over 95% of it is made to be drunk pretty much immediately, or within, say, a 2-year period. It's only really the top wines that are worth are made to for prolonged maturation, and then when I say top, I mean you're sort of I would say in terms of retail price in the UK, say £10-15 plus bottles of wine, so not massively expensive, but a lot of the more sort of basic wines are just made for, and a lot of white wines are made for sort of immediate consumption.
The wine market is in many ways a bit different from other collecting markets, considering that it's really difficult to know how the contents of the bottle actually taste, right? Especially if it has been stored for 20 years or more. Can you be sure it is still a good wine, or is it quite a speculative purchase, buying wine?
I think if you're buying older wine, there's always an element of risk. That's why I think it's important to buy from a reliable source. I mean, for the way I approach it, I mean, I will catalogue the wine accurately, so and I'll give as much indications in the description as any potential flaws in the wine. So that could be if there's been a little bit of seepage or the level's low. I mean, and obviously if there's, always helps if there's a picture of the bottle so you can see what the level of the wine in the bottle, because obviously as the wine gets older, the level of the wine does tend to go down. So yeah, I mean, there is obviously there is this risk. There's a risk of wine being corked, and there's very little we can do about that. And I think that's just part of the risk of buying wine. And I think most buyers are aware of that. I mean, they are prepared to take that risk. And I think these days younger wines, it's very rare to have a problem with a batch of younger wines, unless of course it's possible they might have been stored badly. But I mean, I always take the approach, because it's so infrequent that people actually returns bottles to me, that if there's something clearly wrong with the wine, then you can, I'm always open to having it returned to me, because it's only it's fair to do that, really. I think if people are buying a relatively young wine, they should be able to expect that it's in correct condition. I mean, I think that's a fair expectation for the buyer. But if you're buying a bottle that's 50 or 60 years old, and the level's quite low and it's been described as such, then there is always that risk, and I think people understand that.
You mentioned the Asian market that it has been very strong lately.
Yeah.
Are they still as important for the market today, or is there any other countries where the wine auction market is particularly strong?
I think probably the two main markets for buyers will be sort of Asia and the United States. That's where the biggest auctions are taking place in sort of Hong Kong and in New York. And also these buyers are buying in Europe as well. So they'll bid in sales in the UK, for example. I think at the really top end, they're the most important markets because they are arguably that's where they're the richest countries. So that's where they're the biggest, sort of the wealthiest collectors are. So they are, but each market is at its own. If I look at what I do with Tate Ward, I mean, I'm selling primarily into pretty much all my buyers are British, and they're good quality buyers as well. So there are good. I think each countries where wine auctions are taking place, and this could also include the in Europe as well, continental Europe as well. There are strong. There's a strong buy. There's a decent amount of buyers there, but not necessarily buying the really, really expensive wines.
Also, I mean, now we talked about the wine, but what about we see the prices for whiskey, for example, has increased tremendously as well the last few years. What will be the next? Is it any other liquids, spirits?
It's difficult. I mean, I think that's everyone's trying to find the next big kind of thing, I suppose. I think it's difficult to say. I mean, but even if you look at, say, whiskey, for example, that's something that has done very well over the last few years. But if you look at, say, the history, I mean, I look at, say, from you read about, say, the history of Scotch whiskey industry. I mean, that's had its up and downs over the years. If you look at over a long period of time, I mean, equally, I mean, you could say the same thing about the certain areas of wine producing areas as well have had their struggles over the years. So I think at the moment, if you don't take a view of, say, the last, say, 20, 30 years, I mean, I think it's been pretty strong. I don't think there's necessarily any other products that are going to take the place. I mean, I think there's always been interest from a spirits perspective. You might get it has been dominated by whiskey, cognac, and to a lesser extent Armagnac. I've got a bottle of tequila coming up in my next auction that's valued over £1,000 a bottle, so that's quite rare. So there are some kind of spirits, but I don't think there's anything going to be. I think it's always going to be those kind of areas and those sort of categories of spirits and wines that have a kind of a heritage and they have a history to them, and they always seem to have the demand for the high demand for them. And I think that might be a difference, say, between wine and, say, other wines and spirits and other categories at auction. That I don't think you might not see a new sort of wave of. I don't think you'll see things, say, fall out of fashion, say, like certain other products. Say, for example, some items are like brown furniture. I know they're quite sort of fallen out of favour at auction. Whereas I think it's still very much a traditional market for wines. It's still the traditional areas, because I think people are buying into that sort of heritage, and that's what and the tradition of these wines being, the best wines. I mean, if you look at, say, Bordeaux's, I mean, the top Bordeaux's are classified. The Chateau were classified in 1855, and that classification was done by price. And you had Chateau Lafite, Chateau Latour, Chateau Margaux, Haut-Brion at the very top. Now these are still the top wines, almost 170 years later. So there's a clear reason why these are the great wines, and a lot of it is because the vineyard sites are the same vineyards, and these are the best vineyard sites, and these come from the best regions where wine can be produced. So I think in terms of, will there be a new wines from. Will there be a new wine producing area, a new spirit becoming suddenly popular? I'm not entirely sure it will be like that. I think certainly at the global level. I mean, you might see. I mean, China is becoming not only a big consumer and big buyer of international wines, but China is becoming a big producer of wine itself, and is making good wines that get ratings at wine, by wine judges, etc. It's a massive country, so it's going to have lots of different climates within it. But and I'm sure they'll sell well within in a strong local market. But I'm not necessarily sure they would have a big sort of international range that the classic wines have got. Certainly not in the, I mean, maybe in the future, but certainly not in I would say, in the next 20, 30 years.
You, with all your expertise, have you made a good deal on wine yourself?
I wish I could say I have, but I think you have to be very. I mean, I think if I look at it totally from an investment thing, the way I mean, I did have some wine, some Bordeaux, some very nice Bordeaux actually that I did have, but in the end I did end up selling them because the price was very. I mean, this is what you have to remember when you when you're sort of looking at wines for an investment. You know, it's an investment category. It doesn't generate you any income, so basically you only get get your money at the end when you sell it, and you know you're paying. I was paying storage every year for it, so after a while I decided I was better off putting the money elsewhere actually. So I didn't lose any money, but it wasn't a great something where I double my money or things like that. I mean, what I also I like buying bottles of whiskey as well, which I've got, you know, and they're quite good because I can just keep them at home. But that's not really like a massive great thing. That's, you know, I may have sort of 100 or so bottles that I'm buying up and buying when I can, and eventually I'll probably auction them and we'll see what happens. I mean, it's some of them have gone up in value, and I'm quite pleased with them. But I haven't made any major killings, unfortunately.
Will happen in the future. My last question to you, Peter.
Hopefully. Yeah.
What wine would you have for dinner today?
My favourite wines, I would say, are actually from Rioja in Spain. They are. I think they represent probably the best. I think it's probably the best value fine wine region in the world at the moment. And I think, you know, you can get some great wines from the sort of traditional producers. I like La Rioja Alta or Lopez de Heredia. The great thing about Rioja is that the wines, they release the wines when they're actually ready to drink. So in principle, they'll keep them in for 4 or 5 years for the highest quality ones before they even release them. So that's a good thing, that you can buy these good wines and you don't have to worry about keeping them for 5 years before you can open up a case. So they're our sort of go-to wines. I mean, I love white Burgundy as well. Again, that's one that's becoming, you know, I've seen the prices of them go up in the last 10 years, and they're becoming more and more expensive. But I mean, I like particularly wines from the white wines from the Côte de Beaune, and villages such as, rather than the traditional villages of Pouilly-Montrachet or Chassagne-Montrachet or Meursault, which have become, you know, more expensive. You can find good value in places like Saint-Aubin or Orty de Rest, Pernon-Vergelès, places like that, which I think there's some really good wines. So they're my two real sort of go-to. I mean, I'm actually going over to Amsterdam this weekend. I'm going for a big Bordeaux dinner, so I'm looking forward to that as well. I've got some good Dutch collector friends. We'll be opening up a few nice bottles for that as well. So, but that's a real special occasion.
Yeah, sounds like a pleasant weekend for you then to look forward to.
I hope so. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. So thank you, Peter, for participating, and enjoy both your night and the weekend then.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's great. It's been an absolute pleasure.
To keep up with the latest trends and receive weekly updates on the art and auction world, subscribe to our newsletter on barnabys.com or read Barnabys magazine online.